I'm Scott Marble. I'm the chair of the School of Architecture here at Georgia Tech, and I just want to welcome everybody to the annual Doug Allen Lecture. This is one of our special lectures of the year for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is just that there's so many people, I think friends, family, people who, students of Doug's, people that come back to this lecture, and it's a little bit of a mini reunion. And it's always great to see everybody's face here at this lecture. As many of you know, Doug was a very influential educator, and it had a huge impact on Georgia Tech. He was here for 37 years. He taught a course that we still teach, the history of urban form, that is still extremely popular. Students love the course. And so it's just part of the legacy that Doug has left here at the school, along with this lecture. Doug was also able to kind of bridge architecture and urban design through his training as a landscape architect, and that also has kind of continued here at the school, and again it's had a lasting impact. The Doug Allen Institute, I think there's probably some people here from the Doug Allen Institute, has been formed to kind of preserve the legacy, preserve some of the lectures from the history of urban form, and that's another kind of lasting part of Doug's influence on Georgia Tech and really the city of Atlanta. And this lecture was set up to bring in notable landscape architects or urban designers that are well known around the world, and there's been every year we bring people in, and it's always great because it forces us to make sure that we have at least one, and we usually have more lectures that focus on landscape. And tonight with Marcel Wilson, I think we're certainly following in that tradition. And I want to make a special welcome to Kathy Allen, who's in the audience, and also others from the Doug Allen Institute. This lecture is also part of the Redesigning Cities public program that we've been running for 2 years now, under the kind of leadership and curation of Ellen Dunham-Jones. And this is episode 13 of that lecture. And we decided to combine it because the ambition of the Redesigning Cities lecture series and the Doug Allen lecture just kind of came together, and it allowed us to kind of merge these two lectures. And so we're happy that we're able to make that kind of a partnership. This is the second year in that series, as I mentioned, and it's been a great program because it exposes our students to some of the top thinkers in urban design around some of the most pressing issues facing cities today. And I want to thank the Speedwell Foundation for that series. They've been supportive of this program for 2 years, and again, it's just been a great kind of addition to exposing our students to people that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. As part of that series, there's a podcast that comes out of this. I don't think this lecture is a podcast, but previously today, Ellen interviewed Marcel, and that will be made into a podcast that will be available. And I also just want to mention and thank Ellen Dunham-Jones for coordinating that series the last 2 years. It's been an amazing series, and it continues. So one thing to note, how we're going to manage the Q&A at the end is that we have an app that you can download and then write your questions. They will be sent to Ellen in real time, and Ellen will kind of coordinate and curate the questions at the end of the lecture. So everybody right now should get on their phone. This actually works really well. It's a great thing to have. And go to www.slido, SLIDO.com, and put in this code 7668. That's all you have to do, and then it's very user friendly. And interestingly, we've been getting a lot more questions through this process than just having people raise their hands, a lot more. So anyway, that's how we'll do the Q&A at the end of the lecture, and Ellen will moderate that. Okay, now I want to introduce our speaker for the night, Marcel Wilson. Marcel is a landscape architect and the founder and design director of the firm Bionic, based in San Francisco. I found it interesting on their website that they describe themselves as a small firm doing mega projects. So I think that what I can tell from how they've evolved is that they relatively young firm, but they very quickly started to get some really, really impressive projects. They've been very prolific in their output from the beginning of the firm, starting doing competitions and even some, I think, self-generated projects just to begin to generate and test ideas. And they're now doing, like I said, large projects for an impressive list of clientele. The portfolio of projects includes plazas, parks, waterfronts, infrastructure, university and corporate campuses, mixed-use developments, and post-industrial sites. In a relatively short time, they've been in, this firm has been in existence for about 12 years, is that right, Marcel? 12 years. They built up a list of clients that includes LinkedIn, Adobe, Google. On the private side, they seem to have a kind of cornered the market on the tech companies in around San Francisco. But they've also done a lot of work in the public realm, including work with the city of Palo Alto, the city of Sunnyvale, and several public agencies in San Francisco, including the Port of San Francisco, the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, the Department of Public Works, and the Recreation and Parks Department. The firm has numerous awards, including awards from the AIA in Boston, Chicago, and California, and the American Society of Landscape Architects. Marcel received his bachelor's degree in landscape architecture from Colorado State University and his master's in landscape architecture at the GSD at Harvard. So please join me in welcoming Marcel Wilson.
The lights come down at all? Hi. Nice to see everybody. Thanks for coming. Usually, when I go somewhere, you meet a whole new group of people in a cold room. You like to say something that everybody can relate to. We're in weird times. There's just no good jokes about hand sanitizer. So, I'll start with some thank yous to Scott and Georgia Tech for the invitation to come east, I just really appreciate the chance to come and see the school. One thing about this lecture series in the small world of design, there just aren't many lecture series focused on landscape architecture and sort of communicating its transformative potential, its expertise to the world. And so this series really stands out for its significance in elevating the profession, but also in the academic discourse. And it's so much so that it's attracted the best living landscape architects and designers from around the world. Peter Walker, James Corner, Adrian Huza, George Hargraves, Kate Orff, to name a few. So it's really an honor to be in their company. I haven't spent much time in Atlanta, and I had a chance to walk around the campus today. It's beautiful, even on a rainy day. And I was struck by a couple of things. One, just in the short time I've been here, how many people talked about Doug and the impression that he made on the school. And he must have been an extraordinary person. I mean, to serve multiple decades, and being the one landscape architect surrounded by engineers and scientists. I think that's a mark of strong character. Must be. I do that every day, and I can barely stand it for an hour or two at a time. I love seeing the studios. Just the sense and the spirit of experimentation. I thought that was great, and I really loved seeing everybody in one big room and working in the studio. Digital technology has done one thing to architectural and design education, which has kind of made working virtually possible, and I think that there's no replacement for just sort of being in a cohort and spending time in the studio. So that was really cool. The building was great. And I'm envious of students. Those of you in the audience, I love being a student. I went to the GSD, and I went to every lecture. And I had a rule: if it wasn't interesting in 10 minutes, I'd walk out. I'd understand if you did, but I remember the good ones. But I also remember just one kind of recurring question was like, how do I go from sitting in this seat to actually doing projects that matter? And so the invitation to come and speak here came at kind of a 10-year mark in the firm I started, Bionic. It's actually been around a little bit longer than 10 years, but we're a recession era startup. So I thought it was a good idea to sort of step back and just look at the enterprise and sort of pick my head up from the fog of war and just talk about the work and the evolution of the firm and the work that we're doing today. Bionic's been a firm for about 10 years. We do a full range of projects, and the thing on the left is a sticker. The thing on the right is San Francisco Bay. We work at all the scales in between. We're really not interested in specializing, but more in potential. Potential for a project, its ambitions, unique sites, programs, clients. And I get questions about like, why'd you name your firm Bionic? And there's a few reasons. Number one, it's not about an individual and their name on the door, but it's about a point of view. Two, it's got an immediate connotation of the world and environment and the future, and it captures what we do. Essentially by combining things that are alive and things that are made. And today we find ourselves in the Anthropocene, in the arc of human evolution. The environment is in a crisis. It's largely due to the unintended consequences of not designing life in its totality. And so the mandate for the firm is simply to enable life in this kind of increasingly complicated and technological world. The term bionic has its origins in the 60s. It became known in popular culture in the 70s through science fiction. It was a theory. The movies are always right. They always eventually come true. And it was at the time, ironically, that Design with Nature, the book by Ian McCard, made the observation that the world is under tremendous strain from like sort of a simplistic and resource-consumptive view of the world that's often exercised by engineers and architects. It was really making a case for the agency of the landscape architect, and it pioneered a theory about methods for designing at a large scale, compositing multiple layers of information. And at that time, it was a radical idea, but it was done in the analog. It was a precursor to GIS and the digitization of the globe. And I find the term bionic to be useful in talking about the challenges to environment today, and taking it out of the hands of the engineer and into the hands of the designer. It has a connotation about restoring and enhancing and amplifying, repairing and augmenting, growing and merging things that are alive and things that are made, embedding intelligence, replacing loss, completely replacing lost functions. The idea that you can design a proxy or a simulation for something that's impossible or to bring great joy. It has a connotation of being projective. super enabling, capacity enhancing, the ability to perform higher, proactive, instantly effective. It has an ability to be an equalizing force, to shift ability and equalize ability. It has the capacity to create fun, engagement, excitement, joy, and pleasure, and it's scalable. It's the application of technology at the smallest scales that can be applied for mass effect. And while these images, I love it because they use the human body as an example, but I think every one of those things can be said for and is needed for landscape and environment today. I think landscape is a technology. I think landscapes are inventions. And it took me the better part of 20 years to articulate that. So something about me, I'm from Indiana. My dad owned a hardwood lumber mill. So I grew up around the process of just harvesting lumber and being around machinery all the time. And it was fundamental to kind of my understanding of landscape. It is a brutal process. It's reliant on machines and labor and endeavor. And it's extracting raw materials from the forest and dragging them out and cutting roads and relying on equipment. That material was brought back to this lumber mill where I spent a lot of time as a kid. And the process there is very methodical and process-oriented, and logs are broken down and sawn largely by machines that were kind of an invention of the mechanics at the mill. And that sort of formed my understanding of landscape, and I thought that kind of cycle of regeneration and extraction was normal, and how it was kind of related to economics. That was in the analog, the 70s, and it was the time that this image was shot. This image is known as the blue marble. It was shot on film with an analog camera. The camera was made by Zeiss Corporation, which ironically is one of our clients today. And it was the beginning of the environmental movement. This image was the revelation that there's only one planet, and that was to the mass public knowledge that there was only one planet. And the atmosphere is kind of swirling up above, the Earth is below. You can only kind of half see the ground. 1970s were the analog time, and in the time that I've been alive, the world has really converted from an analog world to a digital world. That's from about the 80s to the 2000s. And it started in a kind of innocent enough way, and while we were all learning how to use one of these on a kind of individual basis, the world itself was digitized. It was imaged, unitized. Landscapes were kind of measured and quantified and remotely sensed. Resources were more effectively and efficiently harvested. Urbanism sprawled. Our capacity for organizing and operating became greater and greater. We have a much greater capacity for management or mismanagement. Our mapping capabilities have become more and more granular. Landscape can be sensed in real time, observed from remote locations. We can tell when the size of an ice shelf the size of Rhode Island is breaking off from the ice caps. We can systematize and remotely sense all of our largest networks and infrastructure, and landscapes and our productivity has been globalized. And so by 2012, NASA released this image. This is the black marble, as it's known. It's an image that was digitally shot with multiple cameras. It maps the globe. And it remasters the view of the Earth to remove the atmosphere. You can kind of clearly see what's underneath. And this is what's underneath. We've urbanized most of it. Ironically, the etymology of that term came about in 2012 as well. I don't know if there's a correlation, but this is a stark wake-up that we had urbanized the planet, and some of it had been designed to negative effect. And that happened incredibly, rapidly. On the ground, this depicts a condition where people and technology and environment are all colliding to extremes. So in one sense, they're merging. In another sense, they're in competition. So my interest when I was a student and in a place where I could really had time to sort of research my interests, I was interested in the supplementing and augmentation of natural processes, things like fire suppression, or the creation and building of beaches, whole geologic systems on the eastern seaboard specifically. Assisted migration and assisting species, kind of augmenting these kind of broken age-old cycles, or just removing species and transplanting them from one place to another because of human intention. Controlled flooding, this is in the Glen Canyon, in order to kind of rebuild larger scale systems and supplement ecological processes. Cloud seeding, I love this one. It's audacious in its ambition, and artificial snowmaking. And these technologies, since this time, have just grown and grown and grown to the point where you can essentially sort of automate an entire geologic feature. I was really interested in that. At the same time, my interest in sort of mechanization and automation had a different dimension. I'm still fascinated by this. I saw this in Columbus, Indiana when I was 10 years old. This is a sculpture by the Jean Tingley. I like this work because it's complexity, it's composed, it's machinic, it's controlled, but it's also chaotic, really unpredictable. It has purpose. It has purposes for intentions that you don't know. It can kind of bring about whimsy. It has a lack of vanity and irreverence. And it's scalar. It creates spectacle in theater. And I really think that I've always been fascinated with landscape's ability to do this and engage greater effects. My graduate work was studying this canal in Brooklyn called the Gowanus Canal, and I was interested in mechanization and technology as an urbanizing force. And my work was really at the time I was interested in this kind of audacious idea that people would move to Brooklyn, which is radical at the time. The canal was this sort of fetid industrial canal. The premise would be that Manhattan would be, people would be priced out. They would move to Brooklyn. This industrial canal would be cleaned up parcel by parcel, and that in a very short amount of time, people would move to Brooklyn, and greater density and public space performance would be needed. And I loved being a student and just spending all my time there. It's a big model. I built a model of Brooklyn. And I looked at these two sites, and one of them was this giant ramp, and there were programs stored on plates in a garage underneath it. The whole surface was networked, and I was really interested in how that could change, and studied all these different configurations for it. I also was really interested in sort of rejecting representation and decoration, so drawings were quite Spartan. And there was another site I was looking at where it's more device-oriented and networked. There was a giant shed that had an opposable roof. Oddly enough, New York has one of those now too. There was a hydraulic terrain that would manage stormwater, and the terrain on top would shift and morph. There was a big rack for storing plates of topography, of mechanisms for screens that would divide these spaces, and I was really interested in performance. And that was my graduate work. I then went on to practice, and fast forward through almost 10 years to about 2009. It seems like a long time ago, but if you maybe were in grade school in 2009, here's a snapshot of what was going on. This guy was president. I kind of miss him. An Inconvenient Truth just won an Academy Award. There was sort of building tension about capitalism and environment. And that tension, especially as it related to deregulation at the time, was becoming more and more visible. Hurricane Katrina, 2005, was transformative, I think, a real wake-up call. An entire city impacted in a short period of time, shrinking, its population. And at the end of this, the society kind of had this, there was a lot of tension, I think. And Maureen Dowd, the New York Times critic, had this great quote about W that I think kind of captured it all, whether or not you believe in it. Just the idea of somebody driving a station wagon into the globe is a good way to summarize it. And it's this time that there was a financial collapse. And I sort of entered the idea of starting a practice when this dynamic, I think, was really emerging, and it hasn't receded. At that time, there was the stimulus bill, right? $787 billion being injected into the economy. And this was supposed to stimulate, and transform infrastructure in the built environments with shovel-ready projects. This did not trickle down to the landscape architects, I can say. And it was very clear to me one day when I'm starting a practice, and I go out to the city of Richmond in the Bay Area for an RFP for this to redo this little park, and 100 landscape architects show up to vie for designing this thing. And I just looked out there and I was like, this is not going to work. You can't tell any one of them apart. They all basically do the same thing. They service a range of clients. They work with the same materials, and it kind of gave me a sense that a new practice had to do something different. And I think that where I'm from in the Bay Area, this is certainly true. There's this kind of overpopulation of landscape architects, and there's a lot of reasons. It's because there's a lot of industries. There's a four-season climate. But they're largely in the business of service, and not that there's anything the matter with that, but California is a bellwether to many things, but it has all of these pressures, and they are visible more and more every day, and I was really starting to focus my thinking about how, what kind of firm, what kind of design practice can be operating in that territory, which is just going to become more and more complex, and it's going to spread across the country. And I think many effects and phenomena witnessed in California you do start to see them in other areas. If you haven't been there, we have bad fires, worse and worse, whole cities, multiple cities every summer impacted by this. We have invasive species. We have a bad pine beetle epidemic that's really impacting the Sierra Nevada. Our beaches show the signs of urban stress, both in these terms, but also in these terms. The fights between dog owners and non-dog owners are epic. We have aging infrastructure. This is the Oroville Dam. It almost broke 2 years ago. We have a bad homeless crisis. We have 400 miles of coastal infrastructure that is outdated and underscaled for the future of sea level rise. And so it's all of these stresses adding up in the metropolitan region. And when I say these things, I think they relate to other metropolitan regions as well. And so you have to sort of plot these larger trends against this. The field, at least in 2009, is still arguably just sort of sitting idle and not presenting itself in the expertise that could engage this massive project of redesigning the Earth with purpose. And so it is obvious that sort of life at all scales is challenged, and that was a design practice that I wanted to sort of mount a career for and aim it at the contemporary. So I literally started a firm with kind of a laptop and a cell phone. I was intensely focused on designing for contemporary issues. The idea of Bionic was a response to urgency and with a simple mandate to enable life, and I really had no idea if it would work. We started off at that time, there's nothing really going on, nobody building anything. So we started off in a very experimental mode. We started out just trying to do the projects that we wanted to work on. This is a small museum. They had a visibility problem. This has got none of the usual ingredients that a landscape architect would use. It's got a 400-watt solar array, 1,000 feet of phosphorus-coated wire. This array powers the coated wires. They illuminate at night, and they kind of unfold over this tree in the garden and kind of make this undulating terrain. This is called solar terrain. It was the first project our firm did, and it really set the ambition for maybe the way we saw the world. Another small project, this is a typical 25 by 100 San Francisco lot. It's got a spring that emerges from behind this residence. It's got lots of kind of interesting adaptations like this crane. The spring trickles down through a runnel and a series of runnels. It goes into a wetland. And the interesting thing about it is how just this tiny bit of water can have this stimulating effect on urban ecology, it's kind of this concept that maybe we've scaled up in some of the work that we've done. We did other speculative projects. This was a project for a botanic garden and kind of multiplying the amount of planting space that could be created by creating a vertical landscape. This is a project in Boston Harbor, and it was about looking up at the sky because there was really no place for humans in this industrialized canal. So it's a big waterbed. It's made out of a fuel bladder, a log, a linear burner, and it was meant for to stimulate this kind of common experience of staring up at the sky and at airplanes. This was a small project in suburban Washington, D.C., and it was about giving a lawn some defense mechanisms from lawnmowers. And so one side of it had spikes and an irrigation system that we had hacked, and so you could mow one side and the other, and not the other. And this is a walk-in evaporative cooler for a garden festival, basically a big air conditioner that anybody could walk through during the summer. Here's a residence where in Ojai, California. It's a California desert, and the idea was to capture the rainy season and then hold it until the dry season. And we built a big 30,000 gallon cistern, and it makes this very pretty flowering garden possible all year long. And this is a project in Chicago. This is a competition. Santiago Calatrava designed this mile-high skyscraper, and then the recession came, and it left a $30 million hole in the ground. So this is an idea for a park. The central feature of the park was basically making this large steam ring launcher. It took lake water and launched these rings of steam up in the sky and made another public spectacle on the Chicago waterfront. And this is a project for doing bike lanes in cities and doing them sort of fast and quickly. And it was a whole kind of series of parts. stickers and dots. They had a kind of branding and identity quality to it, and it was the idea that bike lanes could be sort of fast and improvisational, and you could test them. And then there were larger modules and parts that were scalable, and you could pin them together, array them on streets, and bike lanes should take days, not years, to design and implement, and the whole thing would pack up neatly into a box. And we were, this is a competition for sea level rise in San Francisco Bay, again, before we really knew the order of magnitude of this problem. It was for a pipeline as a piece of public infrastructure to move sediment, more like a utility for moving mud and all of the economic benefits that it could bring. So, you know, networking an entire estuary for all of these purposes, and thinking about an estuary is something that could be sort of designed and managed with ecological intent, but also to be responsive to our own disasters and mismanagement. And so this is the only underwater perspective I've ever done in my career. So this interest in the early stages of the firm was about experimentation, expanding the idea of what Bionic could mean as an approach to practice, and how scalar it could be. This was I did some writing at the time. This is a piece about networking and sharing resources between all of the Hawaiian Islands, and this was a competition right after Michael Jackson had died about taking his entire music catalog and putting it in a satellite and making it sort of free to the earth. His public image was different at the time. We then had a period of time where we actually started to get clients and larger, more complex assignments, and this is a project in East Lansing, Michigan. They have an excess of parking garages there, and this was about converting a parking garage to a hops farm, sort of taking what they are creatively good at and concentrating it into one cultural vessel. So it had a park on top and a combination between a greenhouse and a brewery. We have been working in Malibu since that time. Malibu is, most people haven't been to Malibu, they've heard about it or know about it. It is 16 miles right on the Pacific coast. It's the convergence of extreme beauty and extreme wealth. And we all kind of know these things about Malibu. It's, you know, reference to celebrity. This is Barbra Streisand's house. She has something like 7 chimneys. Malibu is a peculiar territory where rental cops are hired to chase people off of beaches, and it's because there's a fuzzy line between what is public and what is private. And these are all fake signs that people just put up to try to keep the public off the beaches. And because this is most people's encounter with the Pacific Ocean, yet legally the coast of California is public. And it's because of this phenomena that it's defined as wherever the wet sand is, that is what's public, and the dry sand is private. Of course, that line is always shifting. So we've been working with our client from the state to penetrate this. This is the Great Wall of Malibu, and we've got 9 coastal access projects that are all different ways of penetrating that line between public and private. So there's 9 of them. Each one's kind of stranger than the next. This one is a thin little strip of rock that the billionaire Eli Broad bought in apology for putting his tennis court on the easement. It is an interface to miles and miles of beaches. It's a boardwalk. It's built for sea level rise. It's sort of sculpted into the bluff and protects the freeway. Its most radical proposition is a public bathroom. It's right there in the background. This is a different kind of access. This site is tiny. It's 5 feet wide. It's about 60 feet deep. It has a range of elevation change depending on where the tide is of approximately 12 feet. It's over a storm pipe. It sort of, I think, symbolizes everything about the California coastline. It's a place that everybody wants to be. It's just overcrowded. So this is a device to kind of pierce that edge and for it to have a presence to welcome the public. It's kind of this walk-through kaleidoscope device to experience the ocean. We were hired by a public utility to look at urban power generation. These were sites along freeway alignment that relied on a technology called the concentrated photovoltaic array. They're it's kind of a sun tracking solar device. And as we got into kind of studying the maintenance requirements and the functional requirements of this, what would be an industrial installation, we found a lot of correlations between that and just what the kind of nesting and breeding needs of a California quail are. And I'm always interested in finding these correlations between the entirely natural and unnatural. And so this was I think an interesting point in our evolution. Also, we were attracting the kind of work and clients and ambitions that we wanted to do. And then we started to get to build some things. And this had a kind of full range of opportunities. Again, just emerging from a recession. This is a big piece of urban street furniture, and in an industrial district in San Francisco, and it's the face for a museum that's located in the middle of the block. So their problem is that people just whiz by it all the time. So one side of it is painted white, one side of it is this kind of faceted wall is green. It changes colors and flickers as you drive by it, just by the kind of kinetic movement of trains and cars. And then on the sidewalk side, it's public space minded. It's got a super enabled piece of public furniture, armrests and ADA spots and adjustable stools and symbols for directing people into the gift shop, that green arrow. You're not allowed to advertise, but it was kind of subliminal. And it really created this a zone of comfort and in the pedestrian realm where there really one didn't exist before. This is $160,000 spent in three parking spaces, and it sort of gets every value out of every inch of it by being clever, but also through kind of detail and precision and specificity to the site and the opportunities that were there. It's got lots of great little details. We got our first commercial project just in 2011. This is in Mountain View, California, and it's where a lot of technology companies are. And this is a lot line to lot line building, probably one of the only few places that was building office at the time. It's a 16,000 square foot living roof. It provides this whole kind of complement of amenities which are attractive to tenants, but it also provides this kind of great sweeping panorama. It's immersive. It allows you to kind of get up and see the horizon, but it's also managing stormwater. It provides urban habitat. There's a lot of places designed for social interaction. It really makes use of every inch of this roof. I actually interviewed for another job with this developer the other day. They said that this one amenity actually leases the building. He said they'd never sell it. It's a great compliment. Never happens. This is a competition in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you've ever been to Pittsburgh, it's a cool city, and this is right at the convergence of the two rivers and the Fort Pitt Bridge. And you come out of this bridge, out of a tunnel. You're in front of it. You're kind of underneath it. It's this really kind of thrilling but kinetic experience. And so the idea that won the competition was to sort of extend that down into the floor of the city with some intentions to really activating and remaking this street, which had fallen into kind of disrepair over decades of just neglect. And so this is really about designing a 21st century street from building face to building face in terms of inserting open space into a Rust Belt city and the tactical maneuver that is, designing safety, designing people in, embedding culture. There's a sculpture walk that weaves through this kind of series of islands. And it really makes a destination at this kind of important confluence site in Pittsburgh. This is when our kind of urban design work began to take on more serious commissions, and we began to kind of attract more interest. This is a pedestrian bridge in Palo Alto, California. It spans the urbanized side of Palo Alto and launches over and lands in the Baylands to the left, which is connected to the estuary. It goes over something like 13 lanes of traffic, and this is a bike ped bridge. It's not just simply a singular piece of infrastructure, but it's really got people and the ecology of the Baylands designed into it. So there are bird deterrents on the catenary of the bridge. There's a split between bikes and peds that's kind of thrilling either way you do it. Seating designed into it. You kind of spiral around with this aerial view of the wetland, and then land on the bay side. As a piece of public infrastructure, it's got all sorts of adaptations that you don't typically find, including a water system that supports a public bathroom, bike stations, and it's adapted for sea level rise. So underneath all of the fill that was placed in this bay estuary, if you scrape all that off, there's this material underneath called Baymud, and if you add water to that, that's what attracts the birds to all the benthic organisms that live in that substrate. So this is adapted for sea level rise, just to be able to just add water, and over time, this piece of infrastructure would still be able to adapt and stimulate a kind of new ecological relationships between new infrastructure and the bay and the public that used it. Today we're here. We're scaling up. We're getting larger opportunities, more challenging, greater complexities. This is Adobe's new headquarters in San Jose. I signed something that says I can't show you any of the rest of the project. This is in the newspaper, so I can show you this. But it is a $750 million project. The landscape is a big piece of it. It's connected to existing towers by a new bridge, and it has an incredible amount of ambition in a kind of complex urban site. We have a cultural portfolio. This is Fort Mason Center on the north waterfront of San Francisco. It's a former military base. It's designed to keep people out, not let people in. Today it's an arts and culture complex, and so and there's not a tree or a plant on this whole site. It's really about reactivating its cultural potential and doing it within a highly constrictive regulatory frame. It's a national historic district within a national park, and so this is I think 7 years of work to really define the relationship between people and automobiles, to reset all of those, the way the site flows, and to integrate people and make it into a more pedestrian-oriented environment. It now hosts giant parties on Friday. This is a headquarters for LinkedIn. We do the tech sector is very strong in Silicon Valley. It's moving away from Silicon Valley, and a kind of diaspora across the country as the cost of living and building there rises. This project is about undoing a kind of automobile-centric way of thinking about work. So it's taking a parking lot and turning it into a place for people. There's plazas. There's a great big meadow in the middle. the universal access of the campus is tied together by this network of boardwalks, and the whole idea is centered around air conditioners. So there's $10 million that go into structural upgrades so that you can hold these air handling units up on top of these old office buildings. Those air handling units produce a condensate stream, and one day I'm sitting in a meeting with a bunch of engineers and they're talking about how to dump the condensate. And so I think of this as like a $10 million water harvester that produces clean air. And so it goes from the air handling units, it then kind of transferred down into these bird baths, and then it's used to irrigate a stormwater meadow. So most people don't know any of that. It's just a nice place to be. It's really immersive. It's got generous proportions. There's a stormwater wetland and a big meadow, kind of is a part of every day and the connectivity of the campus. It's designed for bikes and activities and gathering and social purposes. It's got a lot of kind of quiet moments to it, quite immersive. It saves a lot of existing trees, but I really think that the kind of the mechanism and the invention of the site itself was the driver in the original idea for kind of creating this sort of more powerful experience that everyone can relate to. And this replaced, asphalt and a vehicular, an environment kind of oriented towards vehicles in this sort of suburban office park. This is Sunnyvale, California. Sunnyvale is the town that is bookended by Google on one end and Apple on the other. These world's most powerful and richest companies. And this is in the middle. And this is actually an image from maybe about 10 years ago. And if you look really closely in the middle, there's 4 trees poking out of a shopping mall. So that's four sequoia trees poking out of the shopping mall. The retail apocalypse killed this mall. Sunnyvale is a donut hole where literally a whole generation just didn't think it had a downtown. Our work there with we're the landscape architect. It's kind of convening 5 different architects, 2 different developers, multiple contractors, and it's a project about rebuilding the kind of social as well as urban fabric of a Silicon Valley city. We started not with drawings and forms, but with an idea about what modern life is comprised of, what people need, and what things complement that, and translate that into lifestyle and a regional destination. We worked through talking about scripting people's experiences there. Everybody from kind of if you're there for a date night, if you live there, if you're a visitor, and then it's kind of been scaled up to a 6-block. Mixed-use project. In the center of it are these 2 blocks. There will be a big public park. It's meant to function as a new town square, and it's got this sort of horticultural feat of taking those 4 redwood trees that are right in the middle of this and kind of recomposing them into another life. So that will be a horticultural feat in itself to give those what they need, and around it, this public square will be, the backdrop of retail and mixed uses, and then there's a kind of urban beach that will be sort of the main attraction. This is Google Cloud's campus. It's also in Sunnyvale. 2 million square feet, it's a lot. 6,000 surface parking lots, or parking spaces. And so all of the landscape is one giant mechanism for managing that much stormwater, and then hosting a very incredibly specific program. So there's one of everything. There's an event center, pool, gym, gardens, lawn, amphitheater, and it connects it. There's even a sport park. It makes the water system and the program overlap with one another in really dynamic kinds of ways. It's very three-dimensional. The water system is pretty much embedded into the way that you move about and circulate. It supports a plant palette that's native almost entirely to the Santa Clara Valley. And if you haven't kind of heard about this, but a lot of these tech campuses are kind of being hyper amenitized, and that's fine. But they also have this kind of capacity to restore ecological functions, become very specific to their to the microclimates, and they're also there's a lot of factors and kind of design elements here to modify climate to make it comfortable. So there's wind screens, there's heaters, there's lots of cafes, and the infrastructure for kind of modifying the climate so that's in use year-round and day and night is sort of part of our intention of enabling this really big site. We've got several places where we're just designing a whole new chunk of a city. This is San Francisco in the lower right-hand corner. We're working in this kind of last frontier of the city. This is called India Basin. It's a feral site, rare on the San Francisco waterfront to have a completely unbuilt site. There's not a stitch of infrastructure on this, so it'll be kind of remaking a city from below the tide line up to its vertical development. It's got this kind of wonderful feral quality connected to the bay and its dynamics, a lot of kind of post-industrial peculiarities, and the organization of this was around, and this is a part of a city where not a lot of people live now. This is organizing it around designing a city for the future and what a real neighborhood might have. So this project's got one of everything. It'll have over 2,000 units of housing, an office component to it, a big public park with a sculpture park, and a really unique engagement with the bay, where development's set far back. A lot of natural processes are kind of, the site's been rearranged so those can flow through it. It'll be a pedestrian oriented and priority environment where you go from a transit center to public streets that are designed for people. We're actually looking at a parking garage there that's sort of got a cascading set of steps coming down. Much of it will be where the streets and the fire lanes and driveways are shared, and where kind of public and community life can sort of unfold. And then there'll be places where living is just directly engaged with the park, and this is really unusual on the West Coast. It's also just an unusual opportunity for a landscape architect to have a kind of this formative role in shaping a piece of a new piece of the city. It gets very interesting as you sort of leave the vertical development and move towards the edge, where the water systems are much more expressed. There'll be no water from this whole development that will be going to a wastewater facility. It will all be released directly to the estuary, so it'll have a very high quality. There's a robust green infrastructure to do that. And it really sets up these big encounters at the edge, designing people back into these post-industrial sites. We're going to see 46 to 96 inches of sea level rise in the next century. So the whole edge has been pretty, designed to anticipate this level of change. It will be kind of radical but slow change, but all of the kind of infrastructure and especially the mobility systems will still function as this transforms over time. At the largest scale, we've been working at Scalable whole city. This is San Rafael, California. It's in Marin County. We were invited to an international competition to talk about sea level rise and think about sea level rise in the Bay Area. Our interest was in finding the city, the place that needs help first. There was a pretty complex analysis done of the whole Bay. And we arrived on the city of San Rafael as the place that needed help first. One, because it was let's say in the infrastructural and economic context, it's one of the 4 cities where everything flows through. Yet it identifies as this kind of sleepy little hamlet in Marin County. Today it is, it looks a lot like a lot of coastal cities. It is packed in, there's lots of uses and infrastructure locking things in place. There are water systems that are changing and they don't have any room to grow. And there's an interface with the estuary of the bay. This neighborhood is subsiding. Their housing stock is sitting low, and the community is there. Is the neediest, mostly immigrant, living more or less hand to mouth. This is one of the kind of workforce communities of the Bay Area, and they would be almost immediately displaced, 10,000 people, by some of these pump failure scenarios that we modeled, where their levee and pump system in a power outage, in an earthquake, with the right tidal conditions could change the city and displace that population forever. These are really complex problems. I think in the face of sea level rise, this is actually more common. What does a small city do? We've seen what big cities are doing. What does a small city do? The tendency is to want to, shut off creeks and estuaries, use hard engineering solutions and do it the old way. But these approaches will continue to accrue risk. That infrastructure will become old one day, and the problems that are kind of deep and profound really have not changed, will not change. So we started to talk about an approach to people, building resilience in place, living life with the Bay, not versus the Bay. We didn't do this in an insular way. We had a lot of community engagement. This is a toy we designed to explain the dynamics of coastal flooding to a whole range of people. It also works as a drinking game. We made this kind of subversive public service ad that you could kind of drive into any neighborhood and talk about the effects of sea level rise. This is the FLOMO, and it's got all of the. It's a big kind of communicator of how sea level rise affects everyone. In the end, we had 5 catalyst projects that we highlighted for this city as a way to begin to address this transformation. The first was to make a resilience hub out of a community park, to upgrade their soccer fields, and to give them a big shed for community events, but also that this is also a levee and it's a pump station, so multi-benefit infrastructure projects, and in an emergency it would serve as a response center. We designed a large new reservoir of housing, which is also a reservoir of parking. Parking is a lot of people's entire incomes depend on their vehicle. And this large new reservoir of housing would sponsor the creation of a large new marsh. We started to talk and design a large sediment surger off their coastline that would continue to nourish the mudflats, but become a tourist destination, a place to study and research emerging technologies and living shorelines, but also a destination and an experience on the water. And the idea was that these catalyst projects, that if you started them early, they would sponsor initiatives, they would grow together over time, and in the end, you would, it would add up to a more resilient city. One of the most interesting questions that we got was like, there's no room to move, and some of our analyses began to get them to turn the corner and see the potential of change once they understood how the city and external forces, globalizing forces are going to change even these sleepy little towns. So this is an example of how we looked at their big box, their auto dealerships, and all of their kind of industrial land uses, and they added up to this big composite of land uses that are changing because of external factors that are transforming quickly. And this led to thinking about the possibilities of adapting an entire city to kind of infrastructural change, lifting, literally elevating people's position in life, but also their sort of physical occupation of land to the scale of an entire city. And probably the biggest leap that we made in the process was thinking about this one city's position in the economy of the metropolis, and to shift that mindset from just the individual to a much larger interconnected future. Thank you.
A little time for some questions, and we had some chairs, but I think we're on.
Here's one.
Why don't we just sort of hang out here? And there's too many questions to possibly answer all of them. I'm going to take moderator's privilege to. I love the last project, San Rafael, is a suburban retrofit writ large with climate change. I love that you were, on the one hand, modeling climate change, but you're actually also modeling the pump failures. And it seems like in so many of your projects, and especially in that one though, you're looking at and anticipating the failure of the parking system, the failure of all these previous infrastructures. Is that a fair way to kind of categorize your work?
Yes, but I'm an optimistic person. I'm gonna just get that out there. I'm by default.
You're not just diving for failure.
I'm a terminal optimist. No, but I think that infrastructure often is sort of optimized to do one thing really well at the exclusion of everything else. And if we're you're trying to sort of read into these projects, what do they share in common? It's how does the combination of seemingly irreconcilable things possibly come together for greater public use, ecological effect, cultural stimulation, and I find that and like to think of that as the invention that we are uniquely qualified to create.
So that somewhat leads to one of the questions, which I think is also asking where how do you balance? So you're optimist, but you are finding for those pressure points. As an ecologically sensitive designer, how do you balance designing for the future and for restoration?
I try to show not so much about any one project, but kind of the arc of how we evolved. Everything is constraint driven. There's a negative side to all of that, and it's I'm interested in creativity as a force to kind of break through that. Balance is great, but I think I try to set our ambitions far beyond balance. I think we're so lopsided in terms of being sort of optimized and car oriented, that the landscape architect should really function as this advocate for life in all of its forms. So balance is good, but I'm sort of looking to shift the scales with our work.
There are a couple of questions that are sort of asking a little, who are you designing for? Who is Bionic's audience? And some of these are kind of getting at the questions of gentrification, of are you really just designing picturesque moments for Silicon Valley's super wealthy? There's a wealth side, clearly. I mean, I think the Sunnyvale project clearly showed attention beyond that. But describe, is landscape architecture often considered a luxury expense that only the wealthy invest in?
Yeah. So one qualifying remark, and I think this is true across a lot of kind of territories, not just California. More and more, the capacity of these private organizations and companies, their organizational capacity, their financial capacity is greater than cities themselves. They move a lot faster, and they're in the business of doing their business. They're not opposed to better values for their projects, but that's not their primary concern. So I find that as we accommodate what they're trying to accomplish, and you add greater effectiveness and greater capability and more virtue, that those two things can advance. I think that's what we bring to projects that emerge out of necessity is a higher level of intelligence and forward thinking.
There are also a couple of questions, I think, just sort of about the practice. So one kind of straightforward question is asking, can you describe a value ratio of how process time is spent on your project? How much time you typically spend on research versus concept versus representation?
Tricky question. We have some projects that move at a glacial pace. These projects in Malibu, I've been working on them for literally a decade, and they kind of work like this. You draw something, and then a lawsuit, and then you draw something else and a lawsuit, and that process just churns along. So there's that, and then there's these companies that have a first day of business. As a firm, I like that we're involved in both. I think great things can come out of going very fast, and that it's great to have time to move slowly. I try to spend as much time on design as we can and not tripping over all of the mundane things. Any project that kind of starts to talk about parking, I immediately say, can we talk about the other things and then take parking, because that always consumes time. So design first. Yeah, as much time as we can.
So that sort of also leads, I think, to another question about, you've shown us the arc of your career. Was there a certain event or time, what is it that gave you the confidence to take on solving ambitious projects outside the typical scope of a landscape architecture? What kind of gave you that moment of saying, I'm going to start my own firm, that moment of I'm going to...
self-critically, I think I'm almost unemployable to work for somebody else. I think I just... So that's one thing. I didn't really see the kind of firm or the kind of organization that I wanted to be a part of. So it was sort of a run into the fire, not away from it moment, for starting practice. Yeah.
So what is your advice for those coming out of school who would like to start a firm authentic to their interests? Do they have to recognize that they're unemployable, or are there other advice, other starting points?
I think it starts in design school. Get as much as you can out of the experience that you're in now. I'm so jealous of students who get to go back to studio tonight, and so I think it starts there, and I think that sort of articulating what you're really interested in and finding focus is huge to setting your career trajectory. And so start working on what you want to do now. And like I said, it took me kind of 20 years to boil down what I'm interested in into 3 sentences. So.
Well, the last question is philosophical, so it might, I don't know if you can get it down to 3 sentences or not. What does ecology mean today if, as Bionic appears to be arguing, we now live in an age where the digital and the natural are inseparably interdependent?
I think that's what it means. I really do. Not to chicken out, but I really do think they're interrelated. But it's I think well, ecology is like isn't the etymology oikos? It's the relationship of systems to one another. As a landscape architect, I think it's the landscape architect's domain to make it work. They might coexist, but really making them work together takes that expertise and the leadership and the kind of vision that motivates all of the resources needed to kind of bring ideas into reality.
So ecology now, we just can't think of it separate from infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the original word is the relationship of systems. I think conventionally it's of natural systems, and it's I think it needs to expand to mean unnatural and natural.
So as we redesign cities for ecology and with a sort of ecological imagination, we inherently are really also have to recognize how to kind of make use of technology, as whether it's prosthetic devices, as mappings, as
and I would argue for landscape architects taking a larger role, being more imaginative and starting to kind of lead the disciplines we've always followed.
Marcel Wilson, thank you very much.